Recently, the New York Times published an article detailing the origin and consequences of the new chip war between the USA and China. This article is exceptionally long, one of the most extensive ever published by the New York Times, showcasing the significant effort by the author. This is not surprising, as in the global dominance struggle between China and the USA, the semiconductor field is undoubtedly a decisive factor. Both sides can agree on this. Therefore, it is no wonder that Americans publish such an extensive article. Due to the length of the article, it is not possible to review it in its entirety. To facilitate everyone's reading and understanding, I have selected only the parts I consider most important. Point 1. The U.S. chip war against China is primarily conducted by an organization called the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, under the U.S. Department of Commerce. This department, during the Cold War, also dealt with the Soviet Union. Semiconductors and relations between China and Russia are issues of interest for the BIS. However, the current resources and personnel of the BIS are insufficient to handle so many challenges. Even the U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce, Matt Borman, commented that they need to spend 100% of their time sanctioning Russia, 100% of their time dealing with China, and still 100% of their time taking care of other matters. Point 2. The U.S. has an extreme fear of any progress that China might make in the field of semiconductors, especially in the area of artificial intelligence. They do not just want China to stop advancing, but to significantly regress. Point 3. According to U.S. semiconductor industry professionals, it is clear that the chip war against China is a declaration of war. We are now in a state of war. Point 4. The chip war against China has already shown some results. In recent years, the global market share of Huawei smartphones has dropped drastically, proving the effectiveness of sanction. However, just restricting Huawei is not enough to eliminate China's semiconductor industry. Therefore, the Biden administration chose broader targets, attacking the entire Chinese semiconductor industry and other strategic sectors. Critical natural resources play a fundamental role in the semiconductor industry. In 2021, a scientific study assessed the supply risk of 15 critical technologies, highlighting that high production concentration leads to high geopolitical risk. The Wall Street Journal reported in April that about 10% of the total value of the world's critical mineral resources are subject to export restrictions. From 2009 to 2020, export controls on industrial raw materials increased from 3,337 to 18,263 items. In November 2022, the Canadian government ordered some foreign companies, including Chinese ones, to divest from Canadian Critical Mineral Resource Company. Last year, both the US and the European Union introduced laws to ensure the localization of the supply of these resources. Countries like Indonesia and Zimbabwe also implemented bans on the export of raw minerals. Moreover, controls on materials and equipment related to the semiconductor industry are increasing. Since October last year, the US has implemented export controls on chips. In May this year, Japan announced a revision to the Foreign Exchange and Foreign Trade Law, which will include 23 categories of advanced chip-making equipment on the export control list starting in July. On June 30th, the Netherlands announced a chip subsidy plan, aiming to attract companies like TSMC and Samsung to build factories in the US and heavily subsidize local chip companies, with Intel playing a central role. Companies like TSMC and Samsung are seen as sidekicks in the US scenario, with Intel possibly receiving almost half of the more than $50 billion in subsidy. In the next 10 years, Intel plans to invest up to $100 billion, potentially becoming one of the world's largest chip manufacturers. However, Intel also pressures the White House, as, even if it builds the largest chip factory in the world, it needs buyers for those chips. Without a profitable market, how to survive? The largest chip consumption market is China, responsible for 30% of global consumption in 2022. If exports to China are interrupted, who will buy these chips? These issues pressure companies like Nvidia and Intel to maintain good relations with China, as cooperation and mutual benefits are essential for U.S. development. Otherwise, the pressure will increase the decline of the U.S. China is not inactive in the face of U.S. sanctions. In response to U.S. restrictions, China imposed export controls on key materials. Although China is not yet at the world-leading level in semiconductors, it holds fundamental materials and processes that major semiconductor companies heavily depend on. The chip war is a complex dispute involving several interconnected stages and industries. While the US is trying to block China's progress, the Chinese government and its companies are working hard to develop their own technology and semiconductor industry, aiming to reduce dependence on foreign technologies and eventually overcome the imposed barrier. Recently, a New York Times article revealed the pressure and obstacles imposed by the US government on China's semiconductor industry, causing great repercussion. The article highlights that the US sees the chip blockade as an act of war, with the ultimate goal of hindering China's technological development. Amid this chip war, China has adopted a series of strategic measures to face the challenges, including autonomous research and development and some restrictions. The narrative that the US is trying to hinder China's technological progress and how China is responding to these measures are issues of great public interest. By imposing multiple technological bans on China, the US aims to eliminate China's ability to advance in technology. This is seen as an attempt to destroy China's growth potential in crucial sectors for the future economy. With this policy, the US hopes to maintain its technological hegemony. However, figures from the US semiconductor industry recognize that the chip blockade is not just an economic issue, but an attempt to stifle China's technological advancement. This aggressive US strategy might end up offering China the opportunity to develop its own capabilities and eventually overcome these barriers. In the end, China's response, combined with international collaboration, especially with countries like Russia, which has increased its production of certain resources in response to restrictions, might change the global semiconductor supply scenario. This chip war continues to be a crucial battlefield in the fight for global technological dominance. According to Reuters, Japan fears that the competition between the United States and China in the chip sector might destroy the Japanese chip industry. Earlier this year, Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry issued a paper warning that by 2030, Japan's share in the chip industry might reach zero. Why does the rivalry between China and the US affect Japan? And what is the future of the Japanese chip industry? The chip industry has become the battlefield between China and the US. After sanctions on Huawei, China decided to create an independent chip supply chain with efforts from both the government and the private sector. A recent example is Wingtech Technology's subsidiary, Anchi Semiconductor, acquiring Newport Wafer Fab, the largest chip manufacturer in the UK, for $834 million. The United States has also made chips a national priority. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo described strengthening chip manufacturing capacity as an economic and national security urgency. The U.S. passed several laws and invested $54 billion in chip research and manufacturing, with Congress supporting American companies like Intel to strengthen production and bring the supply chain back to American soil. TSMC, at the invitation of the Trump administration, decided to invest $35 billion in building a factory in the U.S., with large-scale production expected by 2024, using 5-nanometer technology to produce 20,000 wafers per month. ASML, the world's only producer of EUV lithography machines, also decided to move its headquarters to Phoenix, USA. Before the Huawei case, the global chip industry was in a delicate balance. The US led research, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan strengthened manufacturing, Europe was a consumer, and China's presence was low. The sanctions on Huawei forced China to react, breaking the existing balance while the US intensified the competition. The automotive chip shortage also threatens the European automotive industry, leading countries like Germany, France, and Spain to jointly invest €145.1 billion in semiconductor technology. In May, South Korea announced a plan to become a global semiconductor powerhouse by 2030, with companies like Samsung and SK Hynix planning to invest approximately $425 billion over the next decade, including about $34.83 billion invested in 2021. Japan, which once dominated 50% of the global chip market, now holds only 10% of the market share. Japan's advantage is mainly in semiconductor materials and equipment, such as products from Shin-Etsu Chemical, Sumco, and Toke. In July 2019, Japan announced restrictions on the export of semiconductor materials to South Korea, but South Korea developed substitute products, such as high-purity hydrogen fluoride by SK Materials and fluorinated polyamide production equipment by Kolon Industry, With intense competition and lower-cost rivals, Japan's market share is expected to continue declining. Japan's Ministry of Economy estimates that by 2030, the country's share in the chip industry might reach zero. Face these challenges, Japan increased investments, with the government allocating about $4.5 billion to strengthen the chip supply chain. However, with the cost of building an advanced factory around $10 billion, these funds are insignificant compared to US and EU investments. Moreover, Japan approved a strategy to become a data center hub in Asia, hoping to attract chip manufacturers to build factories nearby. However, China's strong internet industry and the sector's growth in Southeast Asia make this goal difficult for Japan. Although Japan has a solid base in the chip industry, its current position and future planning do not seem advantageous. Additionally, there are fears that the US might further hollow out the Japanese industry, inviting Japanese companies to build factories in the US, as they did with TSMC. Historically, the US tends to crush Japanese competitors when they become threats, as happened with the chip industry. With the US prioritizing its chip supply chain, Japan might be sacrificed again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks to everyone for the support.